At exactly 2:32 p.m, Carol Hunt opened her front door to a familiar face carrying what appeared to be her daughter's belongings. She had no idea that 13 days of careful planning had led to this moment, and that the young man standing before her was about to carry out the most calculated act of revenge her family would ever face. For 25-year-old Louise Hunt, the quiet village of Bushey in Hertfordshire was home. Louise lived with her family in a detached house on Ashlyn Close. She had built a thriving dog grooming business called Groom and Glow during the COVID lockdown, working from a converted pod in the family garden. Her clients adored her gentle manner and genuine care for their beloved pets. Louise was the youngest daughter of BBC racing commentator John Hunt and his wife Carol. The family was incredibly close-knit. Carol, at 61, was described by friends as the nicest, kindest, sweetest person they'd ever known. She was an active member of St James's Church on Bushey High Street, and had met John years earlier in a nightclub in Hemel Hempstead. Their love story had blossomed into a marriage that produced 3 daughters. Hannah Hunt, 28, was a beautician working at the anti-aging clinic in Radlett. Colleagues said she was a fantastic therapist whose clients loved her, always greeting everyone with a smile. She was in a long-term relationship with Alex Klein, who would later call her an angel and the perfect woman. The sisters had attended Loreto College in St Albans and remained exceptionally close throughout their adult lives. The Hunt family had everything to live for. John's successful career as BBC Radio 5 Live's main racing commentator brought him recognition across the nation, but at home he was simply a devoted husband and father. They were, by all accounts, living an idyllic life. But on the 9th of July 2024, that idyllic life would be shattered forever by a man consumed with rage, entitlement, and an inability to accept rejection. Louise had met Kyle Marcus Clifford sometime in late 2022, when she was 24 and he was 25. Born on the 5th of April, 1998, Kyle was an ex-soldier who had served briefly in the Queen's Dragoon Guards before leaving the military in 2022. He worked as a security guard at Amthal, a fire and security firm, but his colleagues would later describe him as immature and inappropriate in his behaviour towards women. Kyle came from a troubled background. His older brother Bradley Clifford was serving a life sentence for murder. Convicted of deliberately running down teenage moped riders with his Ford Mustang in 2017. Kyle reportedly called his brother a geezer and visited him in prison every fortnight. The family had a history of violence that seemed to run in their blood. Their 18-month relationship appeared normal to outsiders. Kyle would visit the Hunt family home regularly, joining them for meals and family gatherings. John Hunt would later say he never heard raised voices once during Kyle's visits. There were no obvious alarm bells that anything was wrong, but behind closed doors, a different picture was emerging. Friends of Louise began to notice changes. Kyle was controlling in ways both subtle and overt. He stopped Louise from wearing makeup, something she had always enjoyed. He dictated her social activities and became jealous of her male friendships. He had what Louise's friends described as a nasty temper, and episodes of road rage that left Louise uncomfortable and embarrassed. One particularly disturbing incident occurred when Kyle showed Louise and her friends an Andrew Tate video depicting an animal being harmed. When they expressed disgust, Kyle laughed and said he found it funny. It was one of many red flags that Louise's friends hoped would eventually lead her to end the relationship. Kyle also had a secret life that Louise knew nothing about. During their relationship, he was signed up to dating sites Hinge and Bumble, maintaining relationships with other women while presenting himself as Louise's devoted boyfriend. At work, supervisors became increasingly unhappy with the way Kyle spoke about women, making degrading comments and displaying what they recognized as misogynistic attitudes. But Louise saw glimpses of something darker. 5 days before her murder, she wrote a note on her phone titled, "When you're sad, look." In it, she documented Kyle's racist views, transphobic comments, his belittling language towards her, and his volatile temper. Her friends and family had no idea how bad things had become. By June 2024, Louise had reached her breaking point. The young woman who had once been vibrant and confident was becoming increasingly distressed by Kyle's behaviour. She confided in friends about his arrogance and anger, his controlling nature, and his explosive reactions when things didn't go his way. On the 3rd of July, just 6 days before her death, Louise shared a poignant message on social media that would later be seen as a cry for help and a declaration of strength. She retweeted a post that read, "I admire women who leave. I don't give a fuck if you left after the first time or the 12th time. I admire that shit. I don't give a fuck if people were calling you dumb for 11 years, but in the 12th year you decided you were done. It takes a lot of strength to break a tie. It takes a lot of self-love to choose yourself." The message was a clear indication that Louise was preparing to leave Kyle, recognizing the strength it would take to break free from what had become a toxic relationship. On the 26th of June 2024, Louise finally found the courage to end the relationship. Her father John would later describe it as a textbook mature breakup, conducted with as much gentleness as possible. Louise understood the conflict of saying goodbye to someone she had once loved, but she also knew with absolute certainty that Kyle had failed to be the person she needed. Kyle appeared to accept the breakup. There were no dramatic scenes, no threats, no obvious signs that he was planning something sinister. To Louise and her family, it seemed that Kyle had taken the news with surprising maturity. Louise believed he had understood her decision and respected it. She was devastatingly wrong. What Louise didn't know was that Kyle's calm acceptance was nothing more than a facade. Inside, he was incandescent with rage. He refused to accept Louise's decision and began planning what he saw as the ultimate act of revenge. If Louise thought she could reject him and move on with her life, he would show her just how wrong she was. Within hours of the breakup, Kyle was already researching ways to make Louise pay for her betrayal. He would not let her go, and he would make sure that no one in her family would be there to support her through what he saw as her mistake. Within 24 hours of the breakup, he was already planning the most horrific act of revenge imaginable. For 13 days, from the 26th of June to the 9th of July, Kyle methodically prepared for mass murder. On the 28th of June, just 2 days after Louise ended their relationship, Kyle began ordering weapons online. He purchased a Horizon Cornet MXT 405 compound crossbow with 6 bolts, a 10-inch steel butcher's knife, and attempted to buy a CO2 Glock air pistol, though this wouldn't arrive in time. He also bought large quantities of duct tape, rope, and petrol. Kyle's online activity during this period revealed the depth of his planning. He conducted extensive research into John Hunt's work schedule, studying horse racing events to determine when the BBC commentator would be away from home. He scrolled through Carol Hunt's Facebook page, learning about the family's routines and habits. He even checked weather forecasts for the 9th of July, ensuring optimal conditions for his planned attack. On the 4th of July, CCTV captured Kyle at a B&Q store purchasing duct tape. He was methodical and calm, a man shopping for supplies with the casual demeanour of someone buying materials for a home improvement project. No one could have imagined what he was actually planning. The night before the murders, Kyle's internet activity took an even darker turn. He watched up to 10 videos by controversial influencer Andrew Tate, consuming content that prosecutors would later describe as violent misogyny. Tate, who faces charges of rape and human trafficking, promotes a worldview that sees women as possessions to be controlled. For Kyle, Already consumed with rage at Louise's rejection, these videos provided a framework for what he saw as justified revenge. Kyle also wrote letters to his family during this period, documents dripping with self-pity that revealed his disturbed mindset. In them, he explained that he didn't want to live life without Louise, and told his loved ones that none of you have failed, but he needed to be at peace. On the morning of the 9th of July, Kyle maintained his facade of normalcy one final time. He visited a garden center with his mother, father, and young niece, CCTV footage showing a man who appeared perfectly ordinary. He even received a call from another woman he was dating, a reminder that Louise had never been his only romantic interest, despite his claims of devastation at losing her. As his family enjoyed their morning out, Kyle's weapons and restraints sat waiting in his car. The crossbow, the knife, the duct tape, the rope, everything he needed to destroy the Hunt family was ready. All that remained was to put his plan into action. At 1:40 p.m. on the 9th of July 2024, Kyle Clifford parked his car near Ashland Close in Bushy. He sat in his vehicle, watching the Hunt family home, conducting a final reconnaissance mission. He left the car briefly to check which vehicles were in the driveway, ensuring he knew exactly who was home and who wasn't. Returning to his car, Kyle searched online for horse racing events, confirming that John Hunt would be away at work. Everything was falling into place perfectly. Carol would be home alone, Louise would be working in her dog grooming business in the garden, and Hannah would return later from her job at the beauty clinic. At 2:32 p.m., Kyle approached the front door of the Hunt family home. He carried his knife concealed in a rucksack and put on the performance of his life. When Carol answered the door, Kyle's demeanor was friendly and casual. He told her he was just dropping off some of Louise's stuff and asked how she was doing. Carol, ever kind and compassionate, actually showed concern for Kyle's well-being. She urged him to get relationship help and offered emotional support for what she assumed was his heartbreak over the breakup. Even as Kyle stood on her doorstep with murder in his heart, Carol Hunt treated him with the kindness that defined her entire life. The conversation was captured by the Hunt family's doorbell camera, preserving Carol's final moments of normalcy. She had no idea that letting Kyle into her home would be the last decision she would ever make. At 2:33 p.m., Kyle stabbed Carol Hunt to death in her own hallway, with Carol fighting desperately for her life. But she'd been caught completely off guard by someone she had treated with nothing but kindness. After the attack, Kyle waited. For approximately 35 minutes, he remained in the house with Carol's body, ensuring she was dead before proceeding with the next phase of his plan. During this time, Louise's dog grooming customers continued to come and go through the side gate, completely unaware of the horror that had unfolded just meters away. At 3:07 p.m., Kyle left the property and returned to his car to retrieve the crossbow. He concealed the weapon under a blanket and re-entered the house, stepping over Carol's body as he positioned himself to wait for Louise. Louise finished her workday and entered the house at 4:11 p.m. The doorbell camera immediately captured high-pitched screaming that lasted for 15 minutes. Louise had discovered her mother's body and realized she was trapped with her killer. What followed was several hours of horrific abuse. Kyle restrained Louise and prevented her from calling for help. Throughout this time, he subjected her to degrading and violent acts, what prosecutors later described as a cruel and spiteful attack. At 5:31 p.m., Kyle took Louise's mobile phone and used it to text John Hunt, asking, "What time are you home?" He was checking whether he would have time to complete his plan before Louise's father returned. He also searched online about disconnecting smoke detectors, as he was allegedly planning to burn down the house with the bodies inside. At 6:20 p.m., Kyle returned to the house after spending time in the garden and closed the patio blinds. He was preparing for the final phase of his attack. Hannah Hunt was approaching the property when she called her mother's phone at 6:49 p.m. There was no answer. She entered the house just seconds after Kyle shot Louise through the back with a crossbow bolt, killing her instantly. Hannah called out for her mother as she moved through the house. When she went upstairs and encountered Kyle, she immediately began shouting at him. At 6:52 p.m., Hannah managed to send a desperate text message to her boyfriend, Alex Klein. "Call police, immediately, to mine, now. Kyle here, police now, he's tying us up." She then set her phone to silent, perhaps hoping Kyle wouldn't realize she had called for help. 2 minutes later, Kyle shot Hannah in the chest with the crossbow. He immediately fled the house, carrying the crossbow concealed under a blanket, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable carnage. Despite being fatally wounded, Hannah Hunt displayed extraordinary courage in her final moments. At 6:57 p.m., she discovered the bodies of her mother and sister. Fighting against her own fatal injuries, she called 999 and told the operator she feared she was dying, that she had been shot, and that her sister and mother had also been attacked. She gave the address before the call cut out. Armed police and ambulance crews were dispatched immediately. Hannah was found alive in the main doorway when they arrived, the crossbow bolt still protruding from her chest. But despite the rapid response, all 3 women were pronounced dead at the scene. Hannah's final act of courage had saved her father's life. Had she not managed to call for help, John Hunt would have walked into Kyle's trap when he returned home from work later that evening. At 6:54 p.m., Kyle Clifford fled the Hunt family home and began driving towards his own house in Enfield. The man who had just committed one of the most horrific crimes in recent British history appeared remarkably calm, CCTV footage showing him leaving the scene with his crossbow hidden under a blanket. Kyle stopped at a lay-by in Ferny Hill before parking at Cook's Hole Road at 7:32 p.m. He then made his way into Lavender Hill Cemetery near his home. There, in the undergrowth, he attempted to create a makeshift noose using rope and a tree branch, but both the rope and branch were too weak to support his weight, making any suicide attempt by hanging improbable. Meanwhile, police had launched one of the largest manhunts in recent UK history. Hertfordshire Constabulary took the lead, supported by the Metropolitan Police, with armed officers, specialist search teams, and helicopters scouring the area. The scale of the operation reflected both the gravity of the crimes and the urgent need to locate a man who remained armed and extremely dangerous. At 8:30 a.m. on the 10th of July, police published Kyle's name, age, and photograph. Chief Superintendent John Simpson warned the public that Kyle may still be in possession of a weapon and urged anyone who saw him to call 999 immediately rather than approach him. He made a direct appeal. "Kyle, if you are seeing this, please make contact." The police confirmed this was a targeted incident and that the suspect was known to the victims. But they were careful not to reveal the full extent of Kyle's relationship with Louise. The investigation was proceeding at pace, but Kyle remained at large. For 22 hours, Kyle hid in the cemetery undergrowth, a coward who had shown no mercy to 3 innocent women, but now cowered in the dark rather than face the consequences of his actions. At 6 p.m. the next day, armed police finally located Kyle in Lavender Hill Cemetery. As officers approached with a police dog, Kyle made one final act of cowardice. He shot himself in the chest with the same crossbow he had used to murder Louise and Hannah Hunt. The self-inflicted wound was severe, paralyzing Kyle from the chest down. He would never walk again. Police confirmed that no shots were fired by officers during his apprehension. Kyle was treated at the scene before being taken to the Royal London Hospital under 24-hour guard. On the 11th of July, Kyle was formally arrested on suspicion of 3 counts of murder, but his cowardice was far from over. physical evidence at the scene painted a clear picture of the sustained attack. DNA evidence proved Kyle had raped Louise during the hours-long ordeal. Duct tape residue was found on Louise's wrists and ankles, confirming she had been restrained exactly as prosecutors alleged. The investigation team processed over 5,000 hours of CCTV footage and conducted hundreds of interviews. But the evidence was so overwhelming that Kyle's guilt was never in doubt. The only question was whether he would face justice for all his crimes. On the 17th of September, 2024, Kyle appeared at Westminster Magistrates' Court via video link from his hospital bed. The Crown Prosecution Service charged him with 3 counts of murder, false imprisonment, and possession of offensive weapons. On the 19th of December, Kyle shocked the court by pleading not guilty to all charges at Cambridge Crown Court. A 4th charge was added, rape of Louise Hunt. But on the 22nd of January, 2025, Kyle changed his plea, admitting to the murders while maintaining his innocence on the rape charge. Kyle's rape trial began on the 3rd of March 2025. In a final act of cowardice, he refused to attend his own trial. On the 6th of March, after just 45 minutes of deliberation, the jury delivered a unanimous guilty verdict. Kyle Clifford was convicted of raping Louise Hunt. 5 days later, Kyle again refused to face the court for sentencing. Justice Joel Benathan described him as,
"The evidence I have heard shows you to be a jealous man, soaked in self-pity, a man who holds women in utter contempt."
John Hunt delivered a powerful victim impact statement to the empty dock, calling Kyle a psychopath and telling him the screams of hell awaited him. Amy Hunt called Kyle a monster. Justice Benathan sentenced Kyle to 3 whole life orders. At 26, Kyle would die in prison. Kyle Clifford's name will be remembered as that of a coward, but the legacy of Carol, Louise, and Hannah Hunt lives on in the love they shared and the strength they showed. As John Hunt said, "I hope women round the world will take Louise's bravery as a shining beacon for their lives." That beacon continues to shine, long after Kyle Clifford's darkness has been contained forever.